The death penalty remains a controversial topic across the country.
This year alone, Oklahoma and Utah adopted new execution methods, while Nebraska is considering abolishing the death penalty entirely. Opponents frequently cite the death penalty's cost to taxpayers as a key reason to do away with it. KRCG 13's Garrett Bergquist spent months combing through state records of first-degree murder cases. Tonight, he explains how much Missourians pay to cover the cost of capital punishment.
In 2008, a Boone County jury sentenced Brian Dorsey to death for 2 counts of first-degree murder. The state spent nearly $163,000 defending him. 2 years later, a Camden County jury sentenced Horst Sabla to life without parole for first-degree murder. His public defense tab came to $15,000. It's a trend that matches what other states have found. Defending a suspect in a death penalty case costs more than if prosecutors are only seeking life without parole.
In the death penalty cases, you have to do what's called mitigation, which means you have to prepare for a penalty phase. And that's really like an entirely separate trial. You've got to do extensive investigation of the defendant's background, which means you have to investigate their family, their school history, their mental health history.
KRCG 13 randomly selected 4 death penalty cases and 4 cases where prosecutors sought life without parole. All 8 defendants were represented by a public defender. Data from the public defender's office show the state spent an average of $134,000 defending those 4 death penalty cases. The life without parole cases averaged about $5,900. KRCG 13 also reviewed the court fees for these 8 cases. This time, the life without parole cases cost far more, but death penalty trials still carry a much stiffer price tag overall. So what about the cost of keeping someone on death row? Unlike most states, Missouri doesn't separate condemned prisoners from the general population, so the Department of Corrections says average costs are the same. The Department of Corrections says the average death row inmate spends nearly 12 years in prison before being executed. If you figure an average annual cost of $20,958, that comes to a total cost of $249,403. Life without parole inmates spend an average of 16.7 years in prison before they die. That means a total cost of $350,000. If you add up all the average costs we've shown you, taxpayers can still expect to spend about $12,000 more on a death penalty case. Some state lawmakers think capital punishment is worth the extra cost.
If you are going to commit an egregious crime, and if you read these cases of the people that are sitting on death row, they've done some of the most horrendous, horrific crimes against humanity, and I think that they should be punished with their life.
Bratton says the state should look for ways to reduce the costs of trials and appeals. He suggests setting stricter time limits for filing appeals and for issuing death warrants. But the public defender's office says time limits already exist.
So speeding up those time limits further would frankly probably just increase the risk, especially that an innocent person might be convicted, because the time limits are actually quite short already. The delays that you hear about in the death penalty are usually not that common in Missouri state courts. Where they may be occurring more is in the federal system.
And death penalty opponents say they think capital punishment is as much a moral question as a financial one.
I still feel morally that the state taking the life of another is not right. I think that if we are going to do something, we need to just lock them up and take away every right and privilege they have.
The state of Missouri has never formally studied the costs of its death penalty. Some state lawmakers have filed legislation authorizing a study, but it never went anywhere. In Jefferson City, Garrett Bergquist, KRCG 13.
You can watch our complete interview with the public defender about what drives the costs of defending death penalty cases on our website, connectmidmissouri.com.